not to be like too earnest or sentimental. I was just so impressed. These are people who, as you said, you're working 6 10s. I mean, and yet you're managing to organize in your plants, in your shops, you're sweeping elections with reformers. I mean, I was just like completely in admiration of the UAW folks. And I was really hoping it would go this way, that actually we would see a new UAW. And so I just like had real props to you and all your coworkers and stuff. Because
Absolutely.
I,
Thank
Yeah.
you so
Really
much.
inspiring stuff.
yeah,
Absolutely. All right. Well,
It's a
thanks.
lot of running around on your break, so
yeah, yeah.
trying to talk to people. I'll say that.
Okay. Well, we're joined by two guests. We have Alex Press, labor reporter for Jacobin. Thank you so much, Alex, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, guys.
Yeah, of course. And then we have Logan Ausherman, a UAW worker out of Detroit. How you doing, Logan?
Not too bad. Just finally enjoying a full weekend for the first time probably in a little while. And I'll be
Jesus.
back to, 6 days a week again, probably for at least a couple of weeks.
God damn.
Enjoying it while I can, enjoying this Veterans Day.
Well, hey, thanks for joining us today to talk about what appears to be sort of the culmination of an incredible series of worker actions and seems to be some wins here. I'm going to be reading from Alex's piece in Jacobin. UAW now has tentative deals with all three automakers, and they look to be historic. Before we get into the tentative agreements themselves, it appears to me that the strike itself, this long labor action, was historic in itself in a couple ways. From things that I've read, this appears to be the first time the UAW has struck all three big American automakers at the same time. That's Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis, which manufactures Dodge, Ram, Chrysler, and Jeep. I was totally unaware that all three automakers hadn't been struck at the same time, Alex. Do you have it? Can you maybe give some insight as to why this was employed for the first time this round?
Yeah, I mean, I think what the UAW decided to do, and I would argue mostly effectively pulled off, was sort of using, the companies against each other, right? There are different terms for this, but often employers kind of pit workers against each other. And here there were three bargaining tables at the same time. And by striking all three, they kept being able to kind of Ford would agree to something, there'd be pressure on the other two to also then model themselves pattern after that. I think there was also just something, I think, and I'm sure our other guest is probably going to want to talk about the actual stand-up strike strategy. But
Yeah.
I think there was which there are downsides and I think there are also upsides. But I think also similarly there was this new leadership. Sean Fain's the new president, won in the first direct election ever in UAW history. The first time members got to directly vote for their
Yeah,
leadership.
amazing.
Which is kind of crazy to think about. And his fellow leaders and like new staff, new advisors, I think they all wanted to do something that would be ambitious, that would, I think, reflect faith in the membership, that a new day in the UAW, you can't just say that when you get elected or when you campaign, you actually have to prove it. And I do think that going on the aggressive and again, trying to put an end to company unionism, actually does make that distinction. People symbolically point to this moment where usually the start of bargaining in Detroit, historically, the president of the UAW, who's about to sit down with the executives and their lawyers, he'll shake their hands. That's sort of the symbolic thing, which for many of us, certainly like on the left or like who hate the companies, like was always so insulting, right? Like you looked at the guy who was supposed to represent you and he's shaking hands with the bosses. And Sean Fain refused to do that. He said, I'm doing a members handshake. And he just went to local plants and talked to members. And that might just be symbolic, but I do think he actually backed it up with strategy too.
Yeah, I mean, combativeness does seem to be a hallmark with this new wave of organizing. I mean, it seems to be a prerequisite for actual effective labor organizing. Logan I mean, it seems like now that it's been put to me in this way, it seems like, yeah, striking all three big auto workers at the same time is a really big task to do. Because you're negotiating different contracts, like Alex said, with three different automakers. So I understand maybe why that hasn't been a strategy in the past. Do you see how effective do you think it was that the UAW took on all three companies at the same time?
Well, I'll say as far as taking on all three companies at the same time goes, that was great. I was happy to see that. However, you know, it stunk a bit of Rutherism to me. Ruther is the guy who started the whole, Walter Reuther started the whole administration caucus and doing this targeted strategy and working with the companies and everything. Um, and honestly, I was a bit disappointed when on, what was it, I think the 14th of September when the contracts expired, I was at work thinking I was going to be walking out. And then I found out we're only targeting 3 plants. Now, like you were saying, it's a lot to juggle. There's 155,000 of us at all 3 of these automakers, and our strike fund was only so much. And I believe the estimates were we would have been able to strike everybody out at once, all 155,000 of us, for about 11 weeks. So I think a large part of this strategy was trying to save that strike fund. And then also, like Alex was saying, put a lot of leverage on the companies. This is one thing that the strategy did do, is it did add some additional leverage. What I liked. What I didn't like was the disingenuity and the messaging and the lead up to the strike. It said, I don't know, people got a little, we're taking God, tripping over my words here. What am I trying to say? People were expecting something different from what happened. That's that's why I was disappointed the same way a lot of other people were, because let me tell you, at my plant in the lead up to this strike, we were working 10-hour days, 6 days a week. We'd been working that for 15 months or something like that. It had been over a year, because this had started in May when we launched a new vehicle. So people just wanted to go on strike to get some time off and stick it to a company that's been hyper exploiting them for years and years and years now, and you're just dealing with these bad contracts.
So you're
Can I
more
ask?
critical of the stand up strike strategy, which is like, if people, that's kind of what I wanted to get into next, was this stand up strike strategy seems to be another historic, or at least novel to my knowledge, aspect of this wave of strikes. And I did hear criticisms of it, like kind of what you're saying, when it was first implemented, because he didn't give warning. Sean Fain, or leadership, to my knowledge, again, didn't give warning that these were going to be. And again, we haven't really explained what a stand-up strike is yet for the listener who may not know. But from my understanding, these are targeted strikes at individual plants that, if I'm giving a charitable explanation of it, allow the union to focus its energy on more specific targets. And
that's the idea, precisely.
Yeah, and so I do understand that initial response of like, well, this isn't a normal strike. This isn't what I thought we were getting into. And, with the Teamsters, we had a hard deadline of August 1st. Everything after July 31st, if we didn't have a contract, we were supposedly going to strike. Like, I marched with a sign that said unavailable to work after July 31st if we don't have a contract. I had one of those signs on my front yard. And then when leadership came up with a tentative agreement with UPS, we kept working. Now, we didn't have a contract, but we had a tentative agreement. And I understand people getting upset at that. But at the same time, my opinion of these worker actions is that their goal is to pressure the company. And if you can pressure the company and get what you want out of them without actually striking, or like a full, industry-wide strike or something, I don't consider that to be a loss. I would say, well, could we have gotten more? Perhaps, but also there's a lot you give up in a full industry-wide or company-wide strike that, I mean, maybe your members in your building were all willing to strike. I don't know. I heard a lot of dissenting opinions among Teamsters, and I'm not sure that a strike would have been any more effective, or at least a lot more effective, than getting a tentative agreement and continuing to work.
Yeah, I just want to speak real quickly on that. My criticism isn't necessarily that, we all should have went out and struck. It's just that the way the messaging was done in the lead up to the strike action, and I know it was done to keep the companies guessing, but it also kind of kept workers guessing a little too much, for my opinion. But ultimately, like you said, the strike was effective. We got a good agreement out of it. I just wish it would have been carried out with a little bit more care for what the workers were thinking and asking for. But it was a much, much, much better strategy than what we had been doing before, where we're just like letting them kind of come to us and take their time and dilly dally. And I don't know. It was a lot. I was happy with the response, but I wasn't thrilled. I'll be honest. I'm a Marxist, so I want to see a lot more than just what they're doing with the strike action. Honestly, but
that's totally understandable. Alex, go ahead. And what were you gonna say?
Yeah, I'll just say my my sort of view on the stand-up strike was I actually was very skeptical at first. Like I wrote a piece the first day, and was very honest about, there are obvious pros here. One being, yes, like you're not spending down that strike fund so quickly. The one that really convinced me over time was I actually underestimated how much this would like work at keeping the pressure on the company and heightening it. You have a strike. I work in media, and I hate to, it's a bad thing how media is. There's a headline, and for the first week, it's a big story that the auto workers are on strike, and then no one pays attention. Now, if there's a new plant every week, there's new escalations, there's constantly an excuse to keep sort of like bombarding the companies and keep escalating pressure. They started at smaller parts assembly or parts plants, and then the last escalation wave was like the big profitable assembly plants. And just to make clear for listeners, like the strike, as was said earlier, immediately when the strike is called, 3 locals were called up, one from each of the big 3 companies, and told, at 10 a.m. tomorrow, you're walking out. And then a week later, all right, now local blah, 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 local 2, local 3, you guys too are now called upon to stand up and walk out. And I do think it's interesting history here that like Shawn Fain and everyone kind of putting forward this messaging referenced explicitly the Flint sit-down strikes that built the UAW. And, those sit-down strikes were revolutionary, I would say, for the U.S. labor movement at the time. Workers at the giant River Rouge plant are refusing to leave. They're sitting down. There are these great photos of like workers reading the newspaper, drinking coffee in the shop. And it built the UAW and inspired so many other workers to build unions and use the same tactic. And Shawn would say, this is our generation's answer, which I thought was really interesting. And it's part of why I was like, okay, let's give it a shot. You're right. That innovation is important. And so, I think the last thing I'll say on this is that, the downsides are, one, exactly to your point, what you were saying, that like part of a strike, part of what's so powerful about it is it's an opportunity to unite the membership. Everyone is in solidarity with each other. Everyone is going through it. It doesn't mean there aren't still disagreements, and certainly tempers can get hot because everybody is sacrificing. But it's this moment of class unity, and it can be really inspiring. And it's also, it's massive. This is 150,000 members under these 3 contracts. That would have been so many places that could have had picket lines that people were converging on, that other workers were getting to know them. And so my fear was really, is this going to isolate the people who are on strike, going to breed resentment by the ones who have to endure a strike, maybe breed resentment by the ones who have to keep working crazy hours, who wish they were on strike? It goes both ways. And I think the one thing that tempers my take on that, I think that is a real concern. It's totally possible that in some places that really did happen. The one thing that no one ever sort of discussed publicly, for understandable reasons, is that the UAW the membership just elected new leadership by a very close margin. And the administrative caucus that was referenced, some of those guys, not all of them, plenty of people supported them and are not like bad people, but there's some of them hate the new leadership. And there are certain locals that will not, if they were told to strike, they would try to sabotage Shawn Fain and everybody else. And I think Shawn, of course, would never be publicly, I doubt he would ever say that's part of why they did this. But it's just true that maybe certain locals couldn't be called upon and couldn't be expected to actually follow through with a serious strike. I don't know.
Well,
That's speculation, but I think it is part of the thinking.
I can give a little bit of context to that because while Sean Fain and a number of executive board members, but the executive board is basically like the highest decision-making body in the UAW, or the International Executive Board, excuse me. Well, I think about half of them are UAWD people. The other half of them are like Chuck Browning, are still administration caucus people. And from what I understand, Sean Fain did want to take a more radical approach to, this strike action. But I mean, and this is just speculation on my part, I think there was some kind of politicking going on the executive board. There's lawyers and political advisors and these more conservative members of the executive board influencing decisions. Because, at the end of the day, Sean Fain isn't like a dictator or anything. He's not passing decisions down from on high. He has to work with the executive board and they set the policy.
Right.
And then the locals, the locals are even worse. The locals are still full of administration caucus people. Like, my local is chock full of them, unfortunately.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Logan, you mentioned the UAWD. Now that is a reform organization within the UAW who helped get Sean Fain elected. Is that correct?
That's correct. He's a member, but he's not necessarily what's the word I'm looking for here? Not like under control of the organization or anything. He works very closely with us, and we work closely with him. So
yeah, and I think in one of your DMs you mentioned that it was akin to like Teamsters for a Democratic Union, TDU, which is a reform caucus of which I am a rank and file member within the Teamsters, who did help get Sean O'Brien elected as our new president. And so I'm hearing a lot of similarities between your guys' struggle and ours. And I saw something, what was it? Sean Fain just spoke at the TDU conference and gave a lot of credit to Teamsters for a Democratic Union for, I think, helping, if I'm interpreting this correctly, helping reform the UAW. Do either Alex or Logan, do you know about the TDU's efforts within the UAW to assist that?
I was just gonna say,
go ahead,
yeah,
Alex.
the thing he said at the TDU convention was like, there wouldn't have been this strike without TDU, and there certainly would have been UAWD. And I think explicitly both means inspirationally.
Okay.
As well as like nuts and bolts, especially through the Labor Notes organization, actually kind of holding trainings over the course of the past few years of how do you build a reform caucus. And actually, it's some of the same people, and they're all, and a lot of them know each other, even if they're members of different unions. So it's a really close-knit relationship among at least some of the people in both of those groups.
That's great. Yeah. It's great to see like overlap between two, nominally different unions. Because again, one struggle. Anything to add on that, Logan?
I was just going to say that's from my understanding, a lot of the same people in Labor Notes who helped organize the Teamsters for a Democratic Union also helped organize the UAWD. And I really like to see what they're doing, and then if they can get more of a foothold, so.
Great. I mean, so I'm reading here from your article, Alex and Jacobin. The Stellantis tentative agreement, like those at Ford and GM, includes pay raises of 25% to base wages through life of the 4.5-year agreement, and the reinstatement of cost of living allowances given up during the Great Recession, as well as a compression of the number of years it takes a worker to reach the top rate, which will shrink from 8 to 3 years. This is such a huge deal. This is something that we didn't address in our Teamsters in our contract that we got, but it's definitely something, that we should try for next contract, because we have a wage progression at UPS as well for full-time employees. But our progression is only 4 years, which is less than what it used to be for you guys, which was 8 years, which is incredible.
Let me speak to that real quick. It took me 6 years to get where I am at full pay, and that was with being laid off for 18 months at one point too. So this is amazing that they got it down to that for me. I'm just shocked by it, I gotta say.
There is, unfortunately, kind of a bait and switch when it comes to a lot of union jobs where these union positions are being sold as, well, this is how you get a living wage. These union workers, like they're paid enough to afford a house and a car and maybe to send their kids to school or whatever. Like, look at the wages they make. But there's always this asterisk that it's like, that's the wage you make after 4 years. And
Exactly.
not only that, that's the wage you make after 4 years after you got a full-time position.
Mhm.
So like me, I was working part-time at UPS for 9 years, loading trucks before I even was able to get a full-time position. And that's just based on seniority. But it was the Great Recession, and they were squeezing as much as they could out of existing drivers and swapping drivers from building to building to avoid bringing up more full-timers. But these wage progressions, because it's not like, oh, you start off like $5 below the top rate and then you move up $1 every year. It's like, no, you start off at half that rate and then you move up by $1. And I mean, I don't know how it is at UAW, I'm just curious, but you don't
Yeah.
actually get that life-changing living wage until after, and so you have to live all those 4, 5, 9 years on a sub-living wage until you actually get that. So this seems like a huge win for you guys.
Yeah, well, it's that and this temp thing, because what that really ties into too is the well, they call them supplementals under the 2019 language, but these temporary workers we have, like I have some of them on my team who I've been working alongside basically since I got up here. Now, it took me 6 months to get rolled over to full time out at Belvedere, but now I'm working out here, and it took me. I have people I've been working with for almost 3 years who haven't been rolled over,
Mhm.
and
Are they
that's why
citing
having a
the economy for that? Are they saying we can't open up any full-time jobs because of a recession or inflation or something like that?
well, they had flipped some people about a year ago, and I think it's much like the Belvedere thing. Like these things are being used as or being used as bargaining chips, I think, because we have somewhere between 4 and 5 thousand supplemental employees at Stellantis, I believe, and
Wow.
we had to negotiate to get a bunch of those flipped upon ratification, and even then we were only able to get, I believe, just under 2,000, 1,950 or something flipped. But
Mhm.
now at least they do have a more clear path to full time with this new contract language, which is why ultimately I'm voting yes. That and the Belvedere stuff, because that stuff's so crucially important, and this contract is really setting us up for a good fight in 2028 when it
Can
expires.
you I didn't realize you had been at Belvedere. Can you explain people what the Belvedere thing is? This was like such
Yeah.
a big deal that they got this plant reopened that had been idled, and had been idled because the companies basically were saying like, "Hey, fuck you" to the UAW, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, tell people about this because you actually worked there.
Well, I didn't just work there. I got in there through my father, who has worked for
Oh wow.
well, I guess Stellantis now for 25, almost 30 years.
Hmm.
So through him, I was able to get a job there. And, about a year after I got a job there, they started slowing down production. I got hired on in, what was it, 2017. So they started slowing down production as I was in the first group to get laid off. I was laid off from 2018 till 2020 when they sent me a letter and told me to come out here.
Hmm.
So now my dad, since he had such high seniority, he was working at the plant the whole time, right up until I think it was a year or two ago that they didn't technically shut it down. What they did is they did this thing where it's called idling.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So the plant's still there. It still could be retooled and product could be placed in it, but there's nobody working there. It's not running any production. It's just sitting there empty, basically, waiting. And what they did at Belvedere is they tore out all the machinery. They tore everything out of that place. So, it's going to have to, even with this new contract, it is still going to take a substantial amount of time to get that place retooled and up and running. So,
Right,
but
because
that's the thing. Oh,
uh,
go ahead, Alex.
well, a novel part of these negotiations and a novel win, is to my understanding, for the UAW was to get that Stellantis plant unidled or
Yes.
reopened, which is, according to what I've read, something that the UAW hasn't been able to do before, or maybe hasn't tried to do before, which is force the workers' input, force the workers'
Hmm.
opinion on sort of managerial decisions like the allocation of work or the running of these plants. And I mean, there's more on this in your article. Alex, the Stellantis deal additionally includes not only the right to strike over plant closures, which was also won at Ford, but the right to strike over product and investment too. This was really interesting to me. What can Alex, maybe can you describe what you mean by product and investment, and what the UAW workers would strike for?
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious if you have like closer understanding of this since you're a Stellantis worker, because you probably have looked at these white pages much more than I have.
I've looked at them a little bit, but I'll be honest. I need I work with a group of people at the plant in my local, so I have a friend who's looked through a lot of this stuff and read in the details. I still need to talk to him with exactly how that language is going to work, because what we've been concerned about mostly is how TPTs are going to get rolled over, how FML, just some basic in the plant stuff that people are concerned about. So that's been the kind of, because I've been trying to survey people in the plants, how they feel about the contract and everything. So I haven't had a chance personally to look at every little detail in the white pages, but.
Yeah, well, so I asked you because I don't want to get it wrong, and I certainly haven't checked the fine print yet of that particular contract on that clause. But the general significance for like the average listener who doesn't understand maybe the ins and outs of all of these contracts is that fundamentally sitting down with the company and saying, we don't care what your excuse for idling that plant is. We say we are not ending the strike until you agree to figure out how to reopen it. It is this idea that used to be actually not totally uncommon, that like the capitalist, the boss, while certainly not a friend of the worker, was understood to have to consider workers and the communities, the effects of his like investment allocation, his spending, his costs, because he knew that workers would strike or that people would, there'd be pressure on him. And so I just want to say, so this, the shareholders became all powerful, 70s, 80s, suddenly executives, there is no sense that it's not that they ever cared about the working class, but there's no sense or pressure that they have to even consider the effects of their spending and resources and pay. And I really think this contract, by one, reopening an idled plant, and also saying workers have the right to strike over plant closures anywhere. So if they try to close one plant, the whole company can be struck. And then also product investment, saying, we want this product here. We want you to invest here. That is a fundamentally, I mean, it'll look different than it used to, but it is fundamentally an end to the idea that a company has all kind of dictatorial power over what they do with their money and with their property. I mean, this really pisses off a lot of the right that this is in this contract, because they're saying, who are they to have a say over what we do with our companies? And the UAW is saying, well, we're the ones who make your profits, so actually we get to have a say. And I think, devil's in the details, but it's philosophically and politically really significant to start having this language to inspire other people as well to try to do the same.
Yeah, it seems like a really big step towards a more worker-directed economy. It's a baby step for sure, but I'm so happy like we're thinking about these things. Anything else to add to that, Logan?
I just want to say something about what you just said, because what's really important to me about this contract, and I know you had to deal with the vote no people at UPS, and I've been trying to deal with them out here in the UAW as well. As this contract isn't, it is a historic contract. It's the best contract that they've ever had in my lifetime. I don't know that I'd call it a record contract, because I know people who have seen better contracts. I mean, they're very old now, but they've seen them. But this contract, what it does is it sets us up in a position to fight as hard as possible and really fight for it all next time. We'll be able to spend time organizing more plants, raising people's consciousness within the union, and building up the strike fund to a level where we could maybe be out for a whole year or something if we really needed to. We have time to prepare now, because I think one of you had mentioned earlier, it's another thing a lot of people, even in the UAW, don't understand. John Fain got elected less than a year ago. He had to, clean house, and get everything back in order at the Solidarity House, and now he has to, go about preparing for a strike strategy. So this all had to be done very, very quickly, and they weren't. I just don't think we were able to get ourselves in the best tactical position we could have been to win things like pensions and the quality of life stuff, which they unfortunately entirely capitulated on. But that's it. Yeah, sometimes it is either that or getting Belvedere back open. So I'm happy to make that right now and look forward to the future when we have a stronger working class movement and a bigger, broader movement that's hopefully has more connections across industry.
I just want to add, as far as looking forward, like what should people expect? I think there's another thing that you're going to hear about a lot more in the coming weeks and months, which is, at one point Shawn Fain said in one of his like recent broadcasts on Facebook, something like, when we go back to the table in 4.5 years, or 4 years, I guess, before they go back to the table, this is not going to be the big three. It's going to be the big five or the big six, by which he meant, actually, I think an important thing for people to know that maybe a lot of people don't, is that the majority of auto workers in the United States are not union members. Mm-hmm. The UAW now represents the minority of auto workers. There are so many non-union shops in the South, especially. And this is a huge problem, not just because it's wrong and those workers in non-union shops have terrible pay and bad benefits and dangerous conditions. It also completely undermines the UAW strategy, right? Because the companies can say, this is going to put us out of business. And they actually can make the case for that because they can point to places that have such low labor costs. And so the UAW existentially, actually very similar to how the Teamsters are very focused on Amazon drivers now and Amazon workers, is that if there are non-union competitors, it could existentially and literally destroy the union's future. Yeah. And I think there's been some public discussion of this, some comments and stuff, that the UAW right now, shops are so hot, even in really unexpected places, meaning that workers in non-union shops are actually kind of banging down the UAW's doors right now and saying, we're in, let's get a union in here, let's be UAW, which is really remarkable because the UAW did try to organize some shops in the South in the past and lost very badly. And everything I hear is that is changing very, very quickly. And so as far as going forward and how quick this had to get done, it's like, if you manage to organize the competitors by the time of the next contracts, or you get a real foothold, that totally changes the amount of leverage you have. It really improves workers' position. So just totally to your point, I think the focus will be on organizing now.
Yeah, I think a win is contagious in several respects. Wins are contagious. Just the broader labor movement that we've seen, the organizing of so many different traditionally unorganized shops like coffee shops and restaurants and things like that. People are getting a taste for it. It's not an abstract idea anymore. It's something your friend is a part of, or it's something somebody you follow on the internet is a part of. And so not only are these wins attractive and contagious to a certain degree across different industries, I think within industries they're contagious, and it's like showing the UAW membership that we can actually do this. Like, when was the last UAW strike?
2019.
Oh, okay.
But that wasn't really a major strike, and it was the first time they had really, I think, struck in the era of concessions. So. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, at the Teamsters, UPS Teamsters, we hadn't seen a strike. We still haven't seen a strike since the 90s, and so it's just so good for a movement to be like, we did something and we got something for doing it. And I think that's going to just get so much goodwill towards Shawn Fain and the reform leadership and the more militant elements of organizing that sets everybody up for good stuff in 2028.
Exactly. I mean, I'll say that is one of the reasons I wanted us all to go out. That's one of the reasons I wanted the Teamsters and us to go out at around the same time, is because that would have been such a massive moment for not just, the Teamsters and UAW, but for the working class in America as a whole, and would have sent such a strong signal to people. And, that in the UAW, at least, there are people, I swear, who would pick up a rifle if Shawn Fain told them to. Like, he's gotten So some people, because these people haven't seen anything but the UAW, like constantly, backtracking and backtracking and backtracking, and now they're seeing what just a little bit of a fight can do. So, it's even just this little bit of a fight was massively important, because it really shows people that when workers fight back, workers can win, and workers do win.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
This last quote from your article is from Sean Fain. If we're going to truly take on the billionaire class and rebuild the economy so that it starts to work for the benefit of the many and not for the few, then it's important that we not only strike, but we strike together, said Fain, calling on other unions to likewise align their contracts to expire on May Day. Because, these tentative agreements all expire on April 30th, 2028, which is, the day before May Day, a famous, working class holiday. Secondly, we demanded a longer contract because one of our biggest goals when coming out of this contract victory is to organize like we've never organized before. When we return to the bargaining table in 2028, it won't just be the big three, but with the big five or big six, like you said, Alex. So I just, broadly speaking, I love that we are returning to a working class language, even for these, ostensibly working class organizations like labor unions. I mean, we saw that with Sean O'Brien. We saw that with his willingness to just call the greedy capitalists what they were, and it was really effective for me, because I'm like, I don't know this guy, I voted for him, because I liked the platform, but like, who knows what kind of a guy he is. If that's the face he's putting forward, like, I'm happy to go along with this and see what happens, and I'm happy we did. And the stuff from Sean Fain is, if anything, been even more militant that I've seen than Sean O'Brien. And maybe Sean O'Brien, maybe he'll get a little jealous and step it up a little bit. But
In fact,
I hope so.
In fact, I heard he was a little jealous at the TDU convention.
So I mean, he didn't call a strike, so you can't really complain. The
friend who was telling me this, I was like, this is good to have. It's actually healthy to be pushing constantly, not just as TDU members. Of course, that's what you should be doing with any elected president. But the fact that now Sean O'Brien has to be like, damn, I had like the spotlight for just a little bit of time, and this guy, people liked him even more. It's like, great, you're gonna have to be even better. So I'm
this is the marketplace of ideas at work. This is the competition that we love to see on the left. Yeah.
Which Sean will come out on top?
Okay. Well, we're about to wrap it up here. Any last words you'd like to say, Logan?
I just want to say thank you guys so much for having me on and let me talk about this, because I'll be honest, I've been a little disappointed throughout this fight because nobody's really covered it. I mean, granted, it's been overshadowed a little bit by some other world events and stuff, but even on the left, really, I haven't seen too much coverage of the, of the UAW from friendly outlets, I guess. So I'm glad to see, somebody talking about it. I know Jacobin does, great work. So thank you, Alex, for coming on and giving some added context. It's great being on here with you.
Yeah.
Tony, are you doing okay up there? I don't think I've heard you talk to
his mic.
He's muted.
Yeah, no, I'm great. I'm great. Thank you. I just I didn't have much to contribute. Everybody was so awesome. I just did some enthusiastic nodding throughout. I hope that was felt.
Well, you did also. There was some behind the scenes stuff you did help out with that nobody will hear, but trust me,
exactly,
it was crucial.
Exactly. Yeah, really important stuff.
But did you hit the bong? That's what I need to know.
I only hit it in the beginning. It just didn't feel right. It didn't feel right for the interview. Maybe I'll get one on the way out. Please do.
Alex, thank you so much for coming on to talk about your article. The article is, of course, UAW now has tentative deals with all three automakers, and they look to be historic. We will link to that reporting in these show notes. But where would you like people to go to look at your stuff, Alex?
Yeah, so most of my stuff is at jackman.com. Is that what it is these days? Yeah.
I think so.
Yes, jackman.com. You also can just follow me on Twitter or Instagram, wherever. Alex N, as in Natasha, which is my middle name, Press. So Alex N Press anywhere. And otherwise, I just want to say in closing, Logan, I went to Detroit for the special bargaining convention back in March, the day after Sean was sworn in. And I wrote like 5,000 words of like, here's what it looks like for reformers to try to take over and take control of the union. And it was crazy. I mean, it really was like, it produced, I think, some of the best writing I've ever done, in part because the auto workers just had so much to say. Like there was, and this frustration had been pent up for years about these corrupt union leaders. And I was just incredibly, not to be like too earnest or sentimental, I was just so impressed. These are people who, as you said, you're working 6 10s. I mean, and yet you're managing to organize in your plants, in your shops, you're sweeping elections with reformers. I mean, I was just like completely in admiration of the UAW folks. And I was really hoping it would go this way, that actually we would see a new UAW. And so I just like had real props to you and all your coworkers and stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, really inspiring stuff.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right.
It's a lot of running around on your breaks. Trying to talk to people. I'll say that.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us, guys, and solidarity forever.
Yeah.
Solidarity
Thanks,
forever,
guys.
Man. Thank you so much. You guys rock.
So much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Peace.
Peace.